In this video, we're going to walk through the first paragraph for our ROE decomposition, which examines how our return on equity changed, which one of these three factors or drivers caused it to change. Did they get better? Did they get worse? And how do they compare to the industry average? So overall, our return on equity has decreased, which is a bad thing, and we are now at 15% less than or worse than the industry average of 19%. So again, we were generating 49 cents for every dollar in equity. Now we're only generating 15 cents in net income for every dollar in equity, which is a decrease. And that's worse than we were doing before. And we are now also worse than the industry average. Recall we have three drivers: our profit margin, our asset turnover, and our asset to equity ratio. Those three drivers impact our return on equity. Our profit margin decreased over this period of time. We were generating 9.8 cents in profit for every dollar in sales, and that has now decreased to 3.47. So it's decreased, and that's worse, and that falling profit margin contributed to the overall trend. And we are now worse than the industry because the industry average is 6.7 cents in profit for every dollar in sales. Asset turnover. Well, asset turnover looks like a bright spot. Our asset turnover has improved. We are now generating more in sales for every dollar in assets. We were generating $1.69 in sales for every dollar invested assets. That's increased to 2.48. So overall, the trend has increased, which is better than we did in the past. And it is an offsetting factor because overall return on equity decreased, but an improvement in asset turnover would have increased our asset turnover. We are now also better than the industry average. Now, with respect to risk as measured by our asset to equity ratio, our asset to equity ratio decreased. And our evaluation isn't really going to be better or worse. We're just going to observe that we've got less risk because the falling asset to equity ratio, it also contributes to the decrease in return on equity. And so, yeah, we've got less risk, but that lower leverage and less risk has contributed to a lower return on equity. And the comparison to the industry, again, we don't want to say we are better or worse. All we can really say is we are taking on still more risk. We've got $1.77 in assets for every dollar in invested equity compared to the industry average of $1.40. Let's now go ahead and take a look at our written ROE decomposition. Our first sentence in our written ROE decomposition wants to tell the reader what happened to return on equity. And how does it compare to the industry average? And our ROE had decreased from 49% to 15% in year 3, and it's now below the industry average of 19%. Now, our next sentence, we want to identify what factors contributed to this decrease and which factors would have been offsetting. And that information's right here. The two factors that contributed to the decline in return on equity were lower leverage and a lower profit margin. So the sentence: the source of the decline is a decrease in the profit margin and a reduction in financial leverage. And these were offset somewhat by the improved asset turnover. The next sentence, we're going to have three sentences relate to our profit margin, turnover, and leverage. We want one sentence for each of them. Here's our sentence. LA Gear's net profit margin declined from 9.85% to 3.47% and is now worse than the industry average. Our next sentence is going to focus on asset turnover or financial leverage. Probably financial leverage, since we're going to first talk about the factors that contributed. So, at the same time, our financial leverage, as measured by our asset to equity ratio, declined by roughly a third from 2.97 to 1.77 in year 3. So we're telling this is what happened, and we're going to also want to include one sentence there discussing what that means with respect to risk. A lower asset to equity ratio means we are taking on less risk, but still we have more risk than the industry average. So this is still above the industry average, which means we're still taking on less risk, but we're again more risk than the industry average. Offsetting these trends, recall, was our asset to equity ratio. Our asset turnover. Our asset turnover improved from 1.69 to 2.48. There's our sentence. LA Gear's asset turnover is better than the industry average of 2.04. It increased from 1.69 to 2.48. So again, first sentence tells me what happened to overall return on equity. Next sentence or sentences tell me which factors contributed and which ones offset. Then one sentence about our profit margin, one or two sentences about asset to equity, being sure to tell me about risk, and finally one sentence about our asset turnover.